Developer life. It's something that I think is true for a lot of us here. It's basic common understandings that we've all gone through, and they've really shaped how we've learned and grown as people. The very first one is about learning, and it's when you're essentially trying to learn a new language or a library. What I found a lot of the times is I'll spend weeks on tutorials, I'll watch YouTube clips, and when it comes to learning the actual material and jumping into a project, I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. It gets to the point where I only start learning a proper language or library once I start using it. I remember when I first looked at React, and it made no sense to me whatsoever. When I looked up YouTube and online, it was even more complicating because I was even not sure what was happening at a fundamental level. With React, you really need to play around with it to get used to it. It's one of those languages that actually makes a lot of sense once you get into the gist. But until you actually work on it, you really will be struggling to understand its concepts. This is another thing that I found out with design as well. I used to do a lot of design on Photoshop. And when I was doing it, I didn't really know what was good design, what was bad design. I looked up lots of tutorials and videos on that as well, and you could always see people doing beautiful designs, but how they made A go to B and create that beautiful design was a mystery. It seemed like they were just pulling a rabbit out of a hat and just making it up as they go, and there seemed to be no structure behind it. Only after lots and lots of practice did I find out that it's actually just one of those things that you learn and pick up after doing it for hours and hours. It's like when a piano player essentially is able to play a tune just out of nowhere. It's simply because he's got a repertoire of lots of examples and practice that he's gone through. So he's able to do that. For design, then yes, after you practice a lot, you'll be able to know what the right spacing is, what the right font sizes are, but you won't get there without actually working on it yourself. And this is the same for development as well. A lot of the times when I was working on JavaScript and I was trying to figure out different functions, I would always use things like Stack Overflow to just figure it out for me. I never actually put the time and the effort into learning it myself. When I started learning it myself is when I actually started learning properly. It was when I stopped starting when I started to stop using Stack Overflow and tried to essentially figure it out on my own. It's a much more complicated process. You have to debug, you have to look up documentation, but over time, you improve your own skill at that to the point where you'll be answering questions for other people that have issues, even if the issue has never occurred again, or never occurred before, simply because you'll have built up that repertoire of solving problems yourself. This is why it's so important to be able to work on projects as a learning experience, rather than just simply watching YouTube tutorials, as ironic as that sounds. So, another thing that I've noticed is for developers, we have really bad schedules for our timing. We might get up at 7 a.m. in the morning, or even work till 7 p.m. at night. And this means that sometimes we're not too sure what's going on. We can really zone into our work. We can focus in and lose ourselves in all of that. And what happens is that we might miss lunch, we might miss dinner, and we might work insane hours. You won't have that with other areas like sports or construction, simply because there are set schedules and your body will get tired after a while. But with programming, it's based on your mind. So as long as you still have coffee, like in my example anyway, I can just keep on going all the way till 3 a.m. and I get a tap on the shoulder from my family saying, wait, it's a little bit late, shouldn't you be asleep? It's something that I play around with because when you enjoy something as well, subject, and that's why you want to work on it. So it's a great way to essentially be very productive if that's something that you enjoy. The other thing about that is that you need to really make sure that you take breaks if you're going to work for a long period. Simply because your eyes will be strained, your back will be strained. You have to make sure you have a good chair. I upgraded my chair because I was finding I was getting a bad back position. And that's something you don't want to get because that's going to ruin the rest of your life if your back is broken up or whatnot. So you want to make sure that you take these things really carefully and you take care of yourself as well. I usually schedule an hour alarm for myself when I'm working, simply so that every hour I'm able to get up, maybe walk around a little bit, maybe have some water, just so that I'm not focused in too much on my work. Yes, it might slow down my production a little bit, but I'd rather do that to stay healthy than to zone in and be extra productive for 1 year, but be a mess after that because I didn't take care of myself. So the other thing that developers and designers I'm sure have to compete with all the time is scope creep. And scope creep is one of those things which isn't obvious until it is. It just creeps up on you, especially when you've got clients and you sell them a project. It should be a good project for a website or something like that. But what happens over time is that they get little ideas of what they want to throw in there. And usually you'll be like, yeah, sure, well, that should be okay. But it's when these things get out of proportion, because the client usually doesn't know how long something takes, or if it's easy or if it's hard. That's really up to you to decide. And this is where, when you're doing a project for a client, it's really important to have a set contract or scope in mind. Because when you start working outside of that scope is where the scope creep appears, and this can cost you real time and money. It can influence other projects you have, so that you might end up promising that you'll do something outside of the scope of what you originally agreed, and this creeps into other projects which you were meant to do, because now you've lost time. This has happened to me time and time again, where I've had clients and we've just done what the client needs, but at the end of the day we've spent an extra week on that client's website. And this is 1 week that we didn't have for a different client, and now they're asking where the second client's website is, because we've sort of left it for a week and haven't touched it yet. So you need to make sure that you're very observant about scope creep so that you don't let it happen easily. Otherwise, it definitely can get out of control. Another thing that I wanted to mention is something very similar to when I was mentioning before on the time that we work. It's essentially that as a developer, you sort of get the expectation that you have to work at any time of day. If something goes down for a client website and it's 11 p.m., you'll probably get a call saying, hey, we need this back up and running because people can't view our website or something's broken. And sometimes it's not even that complicated. Sometimes it might be simply they want a word changed on there from hi to hello. And these things really frustrate me because they should be done during work hours. If there's a plan or something like that, it needs to be done in advance. So many times I've gotten calls at maybe 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and they've been asking for unrequired requests that can be done during the day. So these days I make sure that I put a disturbance lock on my phone so that I don't get any messages after 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, around that time. Simply because that's not the time I'm working. I'm not billing for that time. I'm not making money during that time. That's my personal time for myself to make YouTube videos and stuff like that. It's for you guys. And by essentially opening up myself to working anytime of any day, I really limit my own personal time, because you need to have those boundaries in place. They're your boundaries. And once you lose those boundaries, people will take advantage of that. Quoting is another thing that developers and designers have a difficult time doing. It's hard to guess how much time a website can take. We can give them an estimate based on previous websites we've done and what they're expecting us to do, but estimating is a really hard process. And the other thing that frustrates me about estimating is that we'll build up an estimate for a client. We'll give it to our boss maybe, or the sales guy, and we'll say maybe it's 100 hours, give or take. And what'll happen is that we might come back with the sales guy saying essentially, yep, we've got it, it's done. And when we ask, all right, so what did we quote on? And you find out that the price has actually been cut in half. Now, they want it done for 50 hours, but they still want the same amount of work. This is ridiculous. You wouldn't expect this in other industries. If someone says, hey, I need you to build a house, but I need you to build it for half the price, you would laugh at them. And yet in development and in design, this happens all the time. And it's something that I'm not really sure yet how to fix, because it's really hard to battle with the salespeople and the bosses who are out there with the clients selling the websites. They know what is actually happening. So at least from my perspective, I think that if you're cutting down on the price of the estimates, you should also cut down on the scope. Simply because we don't have that much time to constantly do things. If we're trying to churn out websites in 80 to 100 hours, when we've only quoted 40 to 50 hours, then we're essentially cutting ourselves deep and we won't be able to grow as a business or an organization. So it's really important to be able to make sure that you stick to your quotes or cut back your scope essentially. The other thing that I'm sure a lot of people have had to deal with is essentially making changes for a client where they want maybe this change or that change, maybe the title, the background, and then the next day they want to change back. And it's one of those things that I suppose you can't really do anything about. Obviously, the client has their own website and this is their baby. And if they want something, then yeah, you're going to have to make those changes to some level. But I wish there was a better plan behind what some of the reasoning is for those changes and why their changes are going back. Because a lot of the times, yeah, you can bill for the changes that happen to a website, but you can't really change or bill for the changes going back. But I'm sure we've all had to deal with it with some stage or another. So yeah, just one of those things. One thing which is really hard to estimate for me is how to fix problems when it comes to web design or web development. Sometimes the client says and calls up saying the website is down, we need it back up. How long will it take? And the problem with that is that you don't even know what the problem yet is. It could be anything. So giving an estimate on something that you don't know yet is really not a proper way to do things. You have to essentially say that you don't really know because there is no real answer. Half the battle is finding out what the problem is, and the other half of the battle is solving it. And both of those require good estimates that you can only make once you figure out what those are. When you have these things happen, then I would recommend just saying, hey, I think we're going to have to take a look at this, and as soon as I find out what it is, we can get back to you and find out how long it'll take to fix. This is a more accurate description of what's going on, because if you give them estimates of, hey, we'll get it back up in an hour or two, then when you don't make those, then you're going to make yourself look bad, and you don't want to do that. Because this is going to represent you as a whole, and it might come back that people don't believe you, what you're saying. You have to make sure that you're genuine in what you do and say. And in this case, if you can't give them a proper estimate, then it's better to give no estimate at all. Anyway, these are some of the things that I've noticed as a developer and a designer. It's things that keep popping up, and hopefully I can figure them out in the future. But for now, they plague my life, and hopefully they don't plague yours. But if they do, let me know, and if there's ones that I've missed out. Anyway, my name's Adrian. I do videos around design and development, so if you do like this kind of content and you want to see more like it, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.